Carlina White. In 2011, a 23-year-old woman in Atlanta sat down at her computer, pulled up the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website, and started scrolling through photographs of missing infants. She was not a detective. She was not a journalist. She was looking for herself. The woman she had called mom her entire life could not produce a birth certificate, could not explain why no hospital had any record of her birth, could not explain why, when her daughter needed Medicaid paperwork during a pregnancy in 2005, the document she handed over was rejected by the Vital Records Office in New Haven as a forgery. Her name, she had been told, was Nejdra Nance. At least, that is what everyone thought. Nobody was paying attention to Anugeta Petway back in 1987. She was a woman from Bridgeport, Connecticut, with a history of larceny and drug addiction, and she had just suffered another miscarriage. That was about to change. On August 4th of that year, teenage parents Joy White and Carl Tyson brought their 19-day-old daughter Carlina to Harlem Hospital Center in New York City because she had developed a high fever. Sometime between roughly 2:30 and 3:55 in the morning, a woman dressed as a nurse who had reportedly been seen around the hospital for 3 weeks walked into the room, removed the infant's IV line, and carried her out of the building. The hospital's surveillance system was not working. It was the first known infant abduction from a New York City hospital, and nobody saw a thing. Petway renamed the baby Nejdra and raised her in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where Carlina attended Thomas Hooker School and later graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2005. They eventually moved to Atlanta. Petway had a son in 1998, whom Carlina believed was her half-brother. But throughout her adolescence, Carlina noticed things that did not add up. She did not resemble Petway. There were no baby photos, no birth records, no family resemblance with anyone. That nagging feeling would come back to define her entire life. And in 2005, when Petway could not produce a legitimate birth certificate, she finally admitted she was not the biological mother. She claimed Carlina had been abandoned by a drug-addicted parent. It was a lie, but it was enough to send Carlina searching. 6 years later, Carlina found an infant photograph on the NCMEC website that looked like both her and her own daughter Samani. She called the hotline. Investigators connected her with Joy White. A DNA test in January 2011 confirmed what Carlina had suspected for years. The FBI opened a search for Petway. She turned herself in on January 23, 2011, in Bridgeport. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara's office in the Southern District of New York charged her with kidnapping. She pleaded guilty. There was no trial. On July 30, 2012, Petway was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She served her time at Federal Correctional Institution Aliceville in Alabama and was released on April 14, 2021. The reunion between Carlina and her birth mother Joy White was not the homecoming anyone had imagined. Disputes over money surfaced almost immediately. Joy White's family had filed a lawsuit against New York City's Health and Hospitals Corporation back in 1989, originally seeking $100 million, and it settled in late 1992 for $750,000. After attorney fees that consumed more than a third of the total, the remaining balance of roughly $488,000 was divided into 3 equal shares, with one share locked in a trust that was forfeited because Carlina was not found before age 21. Carlina became estranged from Joy White. She returned to Atlanta, where she continues to raise her daughter and has largely withdrawn from media. She still uses the nickname Nettie, while officially carrying the name Carlina White. As of 2025, Anugeta Petway has been free for 4 years. Carlina White has not made a major public appearance since the 2014 Crimes Against Children conference. She solved her own kidnapping, and the woman who took her served 12 years. Carlina White found the truth because she went looking for it. The next case is about a young woman who was told the truth by the very person who took her and chose to keep the secret. Camilla Mobley. On July 10, 1998, a 16-year-old named Shanara Mobley gave birth to a baby girl at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. Her boyfriend, Craig Aiken, was incarcerated. She was a teenager, alone in a hospital room, and she had just become a mother. 8 hours later, a woman in a floral blue smock and green scrubs walked into Shanara's room, made small talk, picked up the baby, and walked out of the hospital. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her. The woman's name was Gloria Williams. She was about 33 years old. She had recently miscarried, and she was in an abusive relationship. So how did a newborn vanish from a hospital in broad daylight, surrounded by staff and security, and not a single person stopped her? Williams forged documents, renamed the child Alexis Kelly Manigault, and drove to Walterboro, South Carolina, a small town about an hour west of Charleston. She raised Alexis alongside 2 other children in what neighbors and teachers described as a stable, church-going household. By every account, Williams was a loving and attentive mother. Alexis did well in school, attended church regularly, and graduated from Colleton County High School. She had friends, a routine, and no reason to question the life she was living. And then, in 2015, as Alexis approached adulthood, she tried to get a Social Security card. She could not. She tried for a birth certificate. Nothing matched. She could not get a driver's license. Williams, facing questions she could no longer dodge, sat Alexis down and told her the truth. Alexis kept the secret. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 2 anonymous tips. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office investigators, working alongside South Carolina authorities, located Alexis on January 13, 2017. A DNA test confirmed she was Camilla Mobley. Gloria Williams was arrested that same day in Walterboro and extradited to Jacksonville, Florida. She was charged with kidnapping and interference with custody in Duval County. The case generated enormous media attention, in part because Camilla herself expressed no desire to see Williams punished. Williams pleaded guilty in February 2018. On June 8th of that year, she was sentenced to 18 years in prison. 1 year for every year Camilla had been missing, running concurrently with a 5-year custody interference sentence. Her plea included a provision barring her from ever profiting from the case. Meanwhile, Shanara Mobley's civil settlement with the former University Medical Center had been structured as monthly payments of $3,644 through July 2020, with a guaranteed lump sum if Camilla was found before age 18. She was not found in time, and somehow it gets worse. Williams has repeatedly fought the sentence. A March 2022 motion to reduce her sentence to 9 years was denied. In December 2023, she moved to throw out the judgment entirely, arguing ineffective counsel. In June 2024, she filed an amended motion to withdraw her plea. In September 2025, the Public Defender's Office was permitted to withdraw from the case due to a conflict, and a regional conflict counsel attorney was appointed in their place. Williams remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Her projected release date, depending on the source, falls somewhere between July and October of 2032. What makes this case impossible to look away from is Camilla herself. She submitted a handwritten letter to the court supporting Williams' sentence reduction motion. stating plainly that Williams is her mother. She continues to call Williams mom. Her relationship with biological mother Shannara Mobley has been deeply strained. Shannara has said publicly that she has blocked Camilla's number at times. Camilla uses the name Alexis in South Carolina and Camilla in Florida, living between two identities that neither one fully contains. As of 2025, Camilla Mobley is in her late 20s, living between two worlds. She is not reconciled with her biological family. Gloria Williams remains behind bars at Lowell Correctional Institution, still filing motions, still fighting the sentence, and still being called mom by the child she took from a hospital 27 years ago. Camilla Mobley knew the truth and chose the woman who took her. What happened to Paul Fronczak is stranger still, because when the truth finally surfaced, it turned out that he was not even the right child. Paul Fronczak. On April 26, 1964, Dora and Chester Fronczak welcomed a baby boy at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. They named him Paul Joseph Fronczak. The next day, a woman dressed as a nurse walked into Dora's room, told her the doctor needed to examine the baby, and carried the infant out of the hospital. He was never seen again. The response was massive. 175,000 postal workers were enlisted to help distribute flyers. 200 police officers worked the case. The FBI stepped in. 600 homes were searched by midnight. It became the largest manhunt in Chicago history at the time, and it produced nothing. There was no suspect, no arrest, and no baby. And then, on July 2, 1965, a male toddler was found abandoned in a stroller outside a department store in Newark, New Jersey. He had no identification, and no one came to claim him. After more than a year in foster care under the name Scott McKinley, authorities compared the child's features, including ear shape, to photos of the missing Fronczak infant. DNA testing did not exist yet. Based on physical comparisons alone, they concluded the boy was Paul. The Fronczaks, desperate to have their son back, took him home and later legally adopted him. The boy grew up in Oak Lawn, Illinois, as Paul Fronczak. He sensed throughout childhood that he did not resemble his family. At age 10, he discovered a box of newspaper clippings about the kidnapping hidden in the house. The same detail that built his identity, his name, was about to destroy it. But that is getting ahead of the story. For decades, Paul lived as the recovered kidnapping victim. He married, he had a life, and the question of who he really was sat in that box of newspaper clippings, waiting. In 2012, he persuaded his parents to take an at-home DNA test. The Fronczaks initially asked him not to send the swabs in. He sent them anyway. The results from Identigen confirmed, with no ambiguity, that the man raised as Paul Fronczak was not their biological child. The FBI reopened the case in 2013. Genealogist C.C. Moore and a team of volunteer DNA detectives began working the genetic trail. On June 3, 2015, they identified him. His real name was Jack Thomas Rosenthal, born October 27, 1963, in Atlantic City. He had a twin sister named Jill. His biological parents, Gilbert and Marie Rosenthal, were described by relatives as abusive and struggling with alcoholism. Gilbert was a Korean War veteran with post-traumatic stress. Both were already deceased. Jill Rosenthal vanished around 1965. She was never reported missing. And no, I am not making that up. A child disappeared and not a single person filed a report. The real Paul Fronczak was eventually identified as well. In 2018, a daughter of Michigan machinist Kevin Ray Beatty submitted DNA to a genealogy site. The match confirmed Beatty was the genuine kidnapped infant from Michael Reese Hospital. He spoke with Dora Franczak by phone in December 2019. The two never met in person. Beatty passed away from cancer on his 56th birthday in April 2020. No one was ever prosecuted. The woman who took the real Paul from Harlem Hospital was never identified. The Rosenthals are dead. No charges were filed for the abandonment of baby Jack in Newark. As of 2025, the man raised as Paul still uses the name Paul Jack Franczak. He has written 2 books, including The Foundling, published in 2017, and was the subject of CNN's 2021 documentary, The Lost Sons. He continues to search for his twin sister, Jill. New Jersey State Police have opened her case as an active missing person investigation. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has issued an age progression image. Jill, if alive, would be in her early 60s. She has not been found. 2 children were stolen. A third was abandoned. And the family caught in the middle spent decades raising a son they loved, never knowing he was someone else's child entirely. Every case so far involves some measure of deception by a stranger or an outsider. The next one is different. The next abductor was a convicted predator, and the child he took was walking home from school. Stephen Stainer. On December 4th, 1972, a 7-year-old boy named Stephen Stainer was walking home from school in Merced, California, when a man named Irvin Edward Murphy approached him on the sidewalk, posing as someone collecting donations for the church. Murphy was not working alone. He had been put up to it by his co-worker at the Yosemite Lodge, a man named Kenneth Parnell, who had a prior sodomy conviction from 1951 and had been classified by psychiatric evaluation as a sexual predator. Parnell drove up in a white Buick, and Stephen was taken to a cabin in Cathy's Valley. His parents and the Merced police searched for weeks. There were no witnesses. There were no leads. Stephen's family, the Stainers, had 5 children. He was the third. His parents, Delbert and Kay, were left to wonder whether their son was still alive. Parnell renamed Stephen and told him a court had given Parnell legal custody. He was subjected to years of abuse as a child. Parnell moved him between Mariposa and Mendocino County, enrolled him in schools sporadically, allowed him to smoke and drink, and kept him in a 1-room cabin near Manchester. Stephen grew up isolated, told his family had given him away, and conditioned to accept the situation as normal. This went on for 7 years. What finally ended it was Parnell's own pattern. As Stephen grew older, Parnell sought a younger victim. On February 14, 1980, Parnell and a teenager named Randall Sean Poorman abducted a 5-year-old boy named Timothy White from Ukiah. The child was terrified, and Stephen, now a teenager himself, recognized in that boy what had been done to him. Stephen waited until Parnell left for his night security job. On March 1, 1980, he took Timothy, and the 2 of them hitchhiked 40 miles to Ukiah. They walked into a police station. Parnell was arrested by daybreak. Parnell was tried separately in Merced County and Mendocino County for kidnapping. He was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 7 years. He served 5. He was never prosecuted for the abuse against Stephen because most of the offenses fell beyond statutes of limitation or outside jurisdictional reach. Murphy was convicted of a lesser charge. Poorman, the teenager who helped take Timothy White, was also convicted. Stephen's case prompted California to amend its sentencing laws to allow consecutive sentences in similar abduction cases. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Not for 7 years. Parnell was arrested again in January 2003 at age 72 for attempting to purchase a 4-year-old boy from his home nurse for $500. Timothy White, by then a deputy with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, testified at the trial. Stephen's prior testimony was read into the record. In 2004, Parnell was sentenced to 25 years to life. He passed away in prison on January 21, 2008. Stephen's return home was not the rescue story people imagined. He struggled to readjust to a family and a world that had moved on without him. He was bullied at school by classmates who did not understand what he had been through, and he eventually dropped out. He married, had 2 children, and worked at Pizza Hut. Despite everything, he became active in missing children advocacy and helped produce the 1989 NBC miniseries I Know My First Name is Stephen, which brought national attention to his case. On September 16, 1989, Stephen Stainer was struck and fatally injured in a motorcycle accident on his way home from work. He was 24 years old. Timothy White served as a pallbearer. White himself passed away from a pulmonary embolism in April 2010. As of 2026, Stephen's older brother, Cary Stainer, remains on death row at San Quentin. Convicted in 2002 of taking the lives of 4 women in Yosemite National Park in 1999. On April 30, 2026, the California Supreme Court upheld Cary Stainer's convictions and death sentence in a 283-page majority opinion. His appeal cited Stephen's notorious abduction as childhood trauma. California has not carried out an execution since 2006, and Governor Newsom imposed a moratorium in 2019. Stephen Stainer saved a child's life at the cost of his own childhood. The next case sounds, on paper, like something from science fiction. A man convinced a child she had been chosen by aliens, married her in a foreign country, and did it all with her own parents standing by. John Broberg. In 1972, a family in Pocatello, Idaho, met a man through their church who would spend the next several years methodically dismantling their lives. His name was Robert Berchtold, and he was a charismatic, married father of 5 who presented himself as a generous and trustworthy neighbor. He befriended the entire Broberg family, made himself indispensable, and focused particular attention on their eldest daughter, Jan, who was 10 years old at the time. 2 years of trust building later, he made his move. Everything was in place. The Brobergs just could not see what it was building toward. On October 17, 1974, Berchtold took Jan, then 12, under the guise of a horseback riding trip. He sedated her with what he called an allergy pill. He drove her across the border to Mexico in a motorhome. And then he did something so bizarre that investigators would struggle to explain it for decades. He played a pre-recorded voice through a speaker and told Jan that aliens had selected her for a mission. The recording, made to sound like an extraterrestrial transmission, told her she had to bear Berchtold's child before the age of 16 or her family would be destroyed. He married her in Mexico, where the legal age at the time was 12. He harmed her repeatedly over 5 weeks before the FBI located them in late November 1974. This is where the story should have ended. It did not. Berchtold's wife held leverage over the Broberg parents. Robert Broberg, Jan's father, had had a one-time sexual encounter with Berchtold, and Jan's mother, Mary Ann, later entered into an 8-month affair with him. Berchtold's wife used this to pressure the Brobergs into signing affidavits, claiming they had given Berchtold permission to travel with Jan. He was sentenced in June 1976 to 5 years. The sentence was reduced to 45 days. He served 10 days for taking a child across an international border and subjecting her to prolonged harm. In August 1976, Berchtold took Jan again. She was 14. He drove her to Pasadena, California, enrolled her in a Catholic girls' school under a false identity, and posed as her father and a CIA agent. The FBI recovered her 4 months later, in November 1976. Berchtold was charged with first-degree kidnapping. He was acquitted on the grounds of a mental defect and spent fewer than 6 months in a psychiatric facility. John would look back on those years and wish someone had made a different call. Her parents, paralyzed by shame and manipulation, had failed to protect her at nearly every turn. The FBI handled both abductions. Both times they recovered Jan. Both times the legal system failed to hold Berchtold accountable in any meaningful way. The first case ended in a 10-day sentence. The second ended in acquittal. There was no consecutive sentencing, no sex offender registration, and no mechanism to keep him away from the family he had already destroyed. In 2003, Jan and her mother Mary Ann published a book about the ordeal titled Stolen Innocence. Berchtold protested their speaking events, showing up to harass attendees. In 2004, John obtained a restraining order against him. In November 2005, after being found guilty of assaulting a member of Bikers Against Child Abuse at one of John's public appearances and facing additional weapons charges, the 69-year-old Berchtold took his own life before sentencing. He overdosed on heart medication. No meaningful prison sentence was ever served for what he did to Jan Broberg. As of 2025, Jan Broberg Felt is an actress with credits in television and film and has founded the Jan Broberg Foundation, which supports survivors of abuse. The Netflix documentary Abducted in Plain Sight brought renewed attention to the case in 2017, followed by the Peacock dramatic series A Friend of the Family in 2022. Her father Robert passed away in November 2018. Her mother Mary Ann passed away on December 31, 2024. Robert Berchtold was never meaningfully punished. He served 10 days for the first abduction and walked free after the second. The system failed Jan Broberg at every level, from the manipulated parents who signed away their daughter's safety, to the courts that treated a predator as a patient, to the laws that allowed a convicted abductor to walk back into his victim's life for 3 decades. If you like this video and have not subscribed yet, now is a great time to join. We post a new case every day, so hit subscribe and do not miss what is coming next. Bobby and Christy Baskin. In the late 1980s, the United States was in the grip of a moral panic so intense that it tore families apart on the basis of accusations that had no evidence behind them. Parents were being accused of ritual abuse, satanic cults, and animal sacrifice by people who genuinely believed they were protecting children. It was called the Satanic Panic, and it destroyed lives across the country. In Murfreesboro, Tennessee, it destroyed the Baskin family. Mark and Debbie Baskin had 3 children. The 2 eldest, Christy, born in 1980, and Bobby, born in 1981, were the center of a custody conflict that would erase them from their parents' lives for 20 years. In 1987, Mark Baskin pursued a master's degree at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. While he was away, the older children stayed temporarily with Debbie's parents, Marvin and Sandra Maple. When the time came to return the children, the Maples refused. In May 1988, they accused Mark and Debbie of physically and sexually abusing the children and of participating in a satanic cult that involved animal sacrifice. The claims were investigated by Tennessee detectives, who determined that the allegations originated solely with the grandparents. The accusations escalated to bizarre claims of cult payoffs and conspiracies, none of which were substantiated. A Tennessee court, recognizing the accusations for what they were, ordered the children returned to the Baskins. On March 1, 1989, the day the court order was to be enforced, the Maples fled with Christy and Bobby. Christy was 8, Bobby was 7. The grandparents drove to San Jose, California, assumed the names John and Frances Bunting, and renamed the children Jennifer and Jonathan. They homeschooled them to avoid any paper trail. A Rutherford County court order issued on March 28, 1989, exonerated the Baskins entirely and dismissed the abuse case with prejudice. The Baskins spent the next 20 years searching. The Maples spent the next 20 years hiding. Sandra Maple passed away around 2007, taking whatever she knew to her grave. In January 2009, the San Diego Union-Tribune ran an article about the cold case after Tennessee Detective Lieutenant Bill Sharp contacted them. Marvin Maple, angered by the coverage, complained about it to acquaintances at a bar in the San Jose area. A woman who recognized the age-progressed images of the missing children alerted police. It was his own anger that gave him away. Maple was arrested in San Jose on February 2, 2009, at age 73. He was initially held on $1 million bond, later reduced to $100,000. He was extradited to Tennessee. In May 2009, he pleaded guilty to 2 Class E felonies of custodial interference and was sentenced to 4 years of supervised probation. He passed away on May 26, 2016, at age 80. Here is what makes this case different from all the others. By the time Maple was arrested, the children were 27 and 28 years old. They had spent their entire conscious lives as Jennifer and Jonathan Bunting. They had grown up believing their grandparents had saved them. And when the opportunity came to reunite with Mark and Debbie Baskin, both refused. Every attempt at contact was rejected. In May 2017, Jonathan, still using the name John Bunting, gave a public interview in Savannah defending his grandparents. He said they had sacrificed everything so the children could have normal lives. He and his sister maintain to this day that they were, in fact, abused by their parents. The Baskins say this is the product of decades of grandparental indoctrination, and the 1989 court order that dismissed the abuse allegations with prejudice supports their position. As of 2025, both children remain estranged from their biological parents. Jennifer works as a nurse. Jonathan is married with a family of his own. Neither has pursued a relationship with the Baskins. The satanic panic gave the Maples the cover they needed to take those children. 20 years of isolation gave them the time to rewrite the story entirely. Whether the children were rescued or abducted depends entirely on who you ask, and neither side is budging. In most abduction cases, the moment of discovery is the beginning of a homecoming. In the Baskin case, it was not. What happened to Julian Hernandez follows a similar pattern, where a father's love and a father's crime became impossible to separate. Julian Hernandez. In the fall of 2015, an 18-year-old high school senior in Cleveland, Ohio, sat down to fill out his college applications. He was a straight-A student, an athlete, and by every measure, a young man with a future that looked wide open. There was just one problem. When he submitted his social security number, the system flagged it. Something did not match. The number belonged to someone else, or did not exist at all. His guidance counselor ran the number through a database at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. What came back was a photograph of a 5-year-old boy who had been listed as missing from Birmingham, Alabama, since 2002. The boy in the photograph was Julian Hernandez. The young man sitting in the counselor's office was also Julian Hernandez. He had been living under a false identity for 13 years, and he had no idea. Julian's father, Bobby Hernandez, had been in a relationship with Julian's mother in the Birmingham, Alabama area. The couple were not married. Julian's mother has never been publicly identified. When Julian was 5 years old, Bobby went to the mother's home on August 28, 2002, ostensibly to babysit. Instead, he drained his bank account, left a note saying he had taken the child, and vanished. Bobby had previously threatened to take Julian if the relationship ever ended. The mother reported the disappearance, and Julian was listed as a missing child. Bobby fled to Cleveland, Ohio, and built a new life using the name Jonathan Mangini. He obtained fraudulent identification for both himself and Julian, who went by the initials George Johancio. He secured a driver's license, a social security number, and years of employment history under the fabricated identity. Julian grew up believing his mother had abandoned him. By all accounts, Bobby was a devoted father. Julian thrived in school, played sports, and had a stable home life. There was nothing outwardly wrong. That stability was built on forgery, fraud, and a lie told to a child about his own mother. And in the fall of 2015, a routine college application pulled the entire thing apart. Bobby Hernandez was arrested by Cleveland police on November 2, 2015, after an FBI tip confirmed that the boy listed as missing from Alabama since 2002 was living in Cleveland under a false name. Cuyahoga County prosecutor Tim McGinty charged him with 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of interference with custody, 10 counts of tampering with records, and forgery. Bobby pleaded guilty on March 7, 2016, to all counts. At his sentencing on April 13, 2016, in Judge Cassandra Collier Williams' courtroom, Julian asked the judge to spare his father. He told the court that the time he had spent with his father was the only time he had ever truly felt at home and at peace. Julian's mother, represented by attorney Gloria Allred, asked for a substantial sentence. The judge imposed an aggregate sentence of 40.5 years, structured to run concurrently, meaning Bobby would serve approximately 4 years of actual incarceration, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Alabama prosecutor Sean Allen indicated that Bobby could face additional charges for interference with custody in Jefferson County after serving the Ohio sentence. Julian reunited with his mother in Alabama for Thanksgiving 2015 and Christmas that same year. A no-contact order issued in December 2015 prevented him from speaking to Bobby. He has since returned to private life and has not given interviews. As of 2025, Julian Hernandez is in his late 20s. Bobby Hernandez's 4-year concurrent sentence means he was likely released around 2020, though no public confirmation of his release date has been found. Julian's mother has never been publicly identified. She searched for her son for 13 years before a college application form did what law enforcement could not. A father who loved his son took him from the mother who was looking for him for 13 years. The court called it kidnapping. Julian called it home. And somewhere in that gap between what the law says and what a child feels, there is a question that none of these cases can fully answer. Luis Albino's story spans not 13 years, but 73, and it began with a woman in a green bandana offering candy to a child in a park. Luis Armando Albino. On a February afternoon in 1951, a 6-year-old boy named Luis Armando Albino was playing in Jefferson Square Park in West Oakland, California, with his older brother Roger, who was about 10 at the time. Their mother, Antonia Albino, had brought the family from Puerto Rico to Oakland the year before. A woman in her 30s wearing a green bandana approached Luis and began speaking to him in Spanish. She promised him candy if he came with her. He went. She walked him out of the park, and he was gone. Roger was interrogated by police repeatedly in the days that followed. He never changed his account. Oakland police launched a massive search involving Army soldiers from a nearby base, the Coast Guard, and city employees. The San Francisco Bay was dragged. The search produced nothing. The case went cold. In 1966, Oakland Police Lieutenant Dominic DeFria told the Oakland Tribune that it was a rare situation when a boy disappears and does not eventually show up, alive or dead. Luis was raised on the East Coast by a couple he believed were his biological parents. the woman who took him from the park, and the circumstances of how he ended up with this family have never been fully explained to the public. He grew up, served 2 tours in Vietnam with the United States Marine Corps, and became a firefighter. He married, had children, and became a grandfather. He built an entire life on a foundation he did not know was false. The woman who raised him has since passed away. For 73 years, no one knew what happened to Luis Albino. The case was considered one of Oakland's oldest unsolved disappearances. His mother, Antonia, never stopped looking. She visited the Oakland Missing Persons Bureau almost daily at first, then weekly, then monthly, and eventually once a year, for decades. She passed away in 2005 without ever learning her son's fate. She never knew if he was alive or dead. The break came from a generation that never knew Luis. In 2020, his niece, Alida Aliquin, then 63 and living in Oakland, took an online DNA test for fun. Her late grandmother, Antonia's relative, had always kept a newspaper clipping about the kidnapping in her wallet. Aliquin received a 22% match with an unknown man on the East Coast. She could not get a response from him. In early 2024, she revisited the results, searched through microfilm of old Oakland Tribune articles at the Oakland Public Library, and contacted the Oakland Police Department's Missing Persons Unit on March 18, 2024. The FBI and California Department of Justice assisted with the investigation. DNA was collected from Luis on the East Coast and from his sister. On June 20, 2024, investigators confirmed the match. On June 24th, FBI agents accompanied Luis to Oakland to meet his sister, Aliquin, and other family members. He hugged his niece, kissed her cheek, and thanked her for finding him. The following day, Aliquin drove Luis to Stanislaus County to see his brother Roger for the first time in 73 years. Luis returned again in July for a 3-week visit. No suspect has ever been publicly identified. Oakland police closed the missing persons case in June 2024, but both the department and the FBI consider the kidnapping investigation open. No charges have been filed. Roger Albino passed away in August 2024, 2 months after the reunion. His family said he passed peacefully, knowing his brother had been found. Luis has declined media interviews and has remained out of public view. As of 2025, Luis Armando Albino is alive and living on the East Coast. He was 6 years old when he was taken from a park in West Oakland, and he is now in his late 70s. His mother, Antonia, searched for him until the day she died and never found him. His brother, Roger, lived long enough to embrace him one last time. And his niece, a woman who never met him as a child, found him with a DNA kit, a roll of library microfilm, and the stubborn belief that her grandmother's newspaper clipping meant something. 73 years between disappearance and reunion. Ore Steinman's case took only 15, but the way it unraveled was something nobody could have predicted. A teenager typed his own name into a search engine and found his childhood staring back at him. Ore Steinman. In 2003, a 17-year-old in the Los Angeles area was sitting with friends at a computer when someone suggested they Google their own names, just to see what came up. Most of them found nothing interesting. Ore found a photograph of himself as a toddler on a missing children's website. He was listed as abducted from Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, in 1989. He had been told his entire life that his father had abandoned the family. The website said something very different. Ore Jules Joseph Steinman was born in 1986 in Red Deer, Alberta, to Giselle Marie Goudreau and Rodney Steinman, a Ponoka electrician. The couple never married, and Goudreau initially kept Ore's birth a secret before Steinman learned he had a son. A custody dispute followed. In May 1989, a Red Deer court ruled that Steinmann had stronger family ties and granted him sole custody effective June 1st. Goudreau did not wait for the order to take effect. On May 28, 1989, she fled with 3-year-old Auré in violation of the May 17th court order. She went first to Mexico, then settled in the Los Angeles area, where she worked as an administrative assistant for the Los Angeles Unified School District. She changed names frequently and applied for United States permanent residency. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment in Chatsworth for $593 a month. Neighbors described her as a devoted and loving mother. Auré went by the name Auré Torres. For 14 years, Steinmann and his family searched. Rhonda Morgan of the Missing Children Society of Canada worked the case alongside the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. For 14 years, Goudreau hid in plain sight, one state-level background check away from being caught. After Auré discovered his own missing persons listing, he confided in a teacher. His defense attorney would later dispute the Google narrative, claiming that Goudreau had actually told Auré about his father when he was 9. Regardless of how the truth surfaced, what mattered was that Canadian and American authorities were now both closing in. Around the same time, Auré found the website. United States immigration officials flagged Goudreau's permanent residency application and notified Canadian authorities. After Canada obtained a fugitive warrant, U.S. Marshals arrested Goudreau at her home on February 11, 2004. Auré was placed in Los Angeles County foster care. Goudreau was held without bail for 4 months and extradited to Canada. On January 5, 2005, Assistant Chief Judge David Ploss of the Red Deer Provincial Court convicted Goudreau of child abduction. He ruled that she had taken the child in contravention of the court order and had clearly shown intent to deprive the father of custody. The charge carried a maximum of 6 months and a $2,000 fine. On February 9, 2005, Goudreau, then 46, was sentenced to 2 months in jail. The judge stated that the crime must be denounced. Her attorney filed appeals of both the conviction and sentence, scheduled for June 2005. No publicly available record of the appeal outcome has been found. 2 months. For taking a child across international borders and hiding him for 15 years. Auré, who had applied for United States citizenship, graduated high school in California in June 2004 and attended college in Los Angeles. He maintained phone contact with his mother after her extradition, but did not see her again in person. He had not seen his father since 1989, when he was 3 years old. Rod Steinmann's mother, Linda, told reporters in 2004 that the family hoped for contact, that they had never stopped thinking about the boy. As of 2025, Auré Steinmann has remained entirely out of public view. His adult life is not publicly documented, and he has given no interviews. He Googled his own name as a teenager and found the truth that his mother had spent 15 years burying. Whether he ever reconnected with his father has never been confirmed. Sometimes the person who solves a case is the missing child themselves. This final case is the most disorienting of all, because the man who found himself on a missing children website was not raised by his abductor. He was raised by a family who had no idea he had ever been taken. Mark's Panama Barnes. In 2011, a 35-year-old man named Steve Carter was sitting in his apartment in Philadelphia, browsing the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. He was not looking for anyone in particular. He was not a detective or a journalist or a relative of a missing child. He was just browsing. Then he saw a face that looked exactly like his own. The image was an age-progressed composite of what a missing infant named Mark's Panama Moriarty Barnes might look like at age 26. The composite had been created after Marks's half-sister Jennifer convinced Hawaiian authorities to reopen the cold case in 2001. Carter stared at the image. The resemblance was uncanny. The listed birth date was nearly identical to his own. And the birthplace, Hauula on Oahu's North Shore, was the same town listed on his adoption papers. The coincidences were too precise to ignore. Steve Carter had been adopted at age 4 by Steve and Pat Carter, who raised him in New Jersey. He knew he had been adopted from an early age. He knew almost nothing else about where he came from or why he had ended up in an orphanage in the first place. What actually happened to Marks Panama Barnes is a story rooted in maternal mental illness and a system that lost track of a child. Marks was born on January 17, 1977, in Hauula, Hawaii, to Charlotte Moriarty and her boyfriend, Mark Barnes. On June 21, 1977, Charlotte placed 5-month-old Marks in his stroller for a walk around 9 in the morning. Neither she nor the baby returned. Mark Barnes found the empty stroller at a bus stop on Kamehameha Highway around 1 in the afternoon. He did not file a missing person report until July 10th, nearly 3 weeks later, telling police that Charlotte had wandered off before and always returned. Charlotte's family disputed this account, saying she would never have left voluntarily. Charlotte had taken Marks to a stranger's home, where she gave authorities a false name and birth date for her son. She was then admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Marks was placed in protective custody under the false identity. A few days later, Charlotte vanished from the hospital and has never been found. Marks, now listed under a name that did not belong to him, became a ward of the state and was placed in an orphanage. At age 4, he was adopted by the Carters, who knew only that he had been adopted. They raised him in New Jersey and gave him a stable childhood. They did not know he was a missing child. They had no reason to suspect anything. Mark Barnes was never charged. After seeing the composite in 2011, Carter contacted Honolulu police. A DNA test conducted nearly a year later confirmed his identity. On October 3, 2011, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children publicly reported that Marks Panama Barnes had been recovered. Carter wound up with 2 birthdays, 3 birth certificates, and 10 names accumulated across his lifetime. His case has been called one of the longest missing child cases in United States history to be solved. Though it is more accurately described as a case of maternal disappearance, institutional failure, and an adoption system that never connected the dots. No prosecutions occurred. Charlotte Moriarty remains a missing person and would now be in her 70s, if alive. Her case is one of Hawaii's longest-running missing adult investigations from that era. Mark Barnes was investigated in 1977, but never charged. Charlotte's family has maintained that she would never have left voluntarily. As of 2025, Steve Carter lives in the northeastern United States with his wife. He has spoken by phone with his biological father, Mark Barnes, who lives in Northern California, but has not met him in person. When asked about his biological mother, Carter has said simply that nobody knows where she is. He was not taken by a kidnapper and raised in captivity. He was taken by a mother in crisis, lost in a system that failed to connect the dots, and adopted by a family who gave him a life. He found himself by accident on a website built to find people exactly like him. 10 names, 10 stolen childhoods. Some found justice, some found family, and some found that the truth only made things harder. Every one of them had to answer the same question: who am I now that I know? Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.